Hello and welcome to the Disability and Podcast by Grey Eye and Disability Arts Online. My name's Joe Turnbull, Assistant Editor of Disability Arts Online, and for this episode I'll be talking to Claire Cunningham about disability and aesthetics. Claire is an internationally acclaimed Scottish performer and choreographer who is currently a factory artist with Tanzhaus NRW in Düsseldorf and associate artist at The Place, London. Claire's work embraces lived experiences of disability and the exploration of specific physicalities, including the use/misuse of her crutches. As such, she consciously rejects the traditional aesthetics and techniques of contemporary dance. I spoke to Claire shortly before the premiere of her new work, Thank You Very Much, at Manchester International Festival in July 2019. Yeah, aesthetics is a word that I think if you work in the visual arts or in dance, you're probably quite familiar with. But I think to other people outside of those worlds, it can almost be one of those sort of art-wanky terms a little bit. I don't know if you feel that way.
Yeah, I was like, oh God, are you going to ask me what the word means? Because I'm like, don't really know what it was. But it is one of these words that we bandy about an awful lot in dance, in the arts, in culture, I think particularly. Maybe it's one of these words that we forget that we all probably mean very different things, but we never take the time to even think, what do you mean when you say aesthetics? Like, disabled, it's one of these words that we make a presumption that we're all talking about the same thing.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I've doesn't mean that I have a great answer for what I think it is, but yeah.
It's something to do with, for me it feels there is a relationship to something to do with visual language, generally.
I guess, it becomes manifested in visual, and
of course you can have an auditory aesthetic.
Yeah, I think for me, quite often aesthetics become rooted in values.
Yeah.
And what are the things that we place value in? And the things that people place value in define what they regard as aesthetically repellent or aesthetically what's the opposite? Desirable. Because I think quite often every so often I return to this idea of actually, I think what I'm trying in my own weird way to do is redefine what we place value in, that the vertical body is not the most valued, and the things that we haven't noticed that society has dictated, women with long hair are more aesthetically, or are more women than women with short hair, very cheesy example, but what are they're rooted in the things that we think are valuable.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, actually. It's about values. And I think there's a bit of a fallacy that there's a scientific element to aesthetics, like the golden ratio and all these sorts of things, and I think it's an absolute nonsense. It reflects values. You're right, what the society values.
I think then it becomes easily backed up by notions of science, by there being more people like this thing. It becomes about data, but then that just becomes, it's a sort of self-perpetuating argument,
Absolutely.
Because if this is what people like, if you tell people that that's what people like, then people think they like it, and it just, more people then say that they like it, but they don't question what is it that you like about this. It's just that you've kind of been told or conditioned that this is what you should like. This is how things should be, Scott.
Yeah. Do you think there's such a thing as a disability aesthetic? But does a disability
I guess
aesthetic
there are
just
ways
mean
in which you
reclaiming?
could. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's more about. Is it more that it's about, rather than it being something that's quantifiable, it's more about the pushback or the rejection of more normative bodied
aesthetically valued things.
Yeah. There's not an
I don't think there's
essential
one
nature of it.
thing.
No.
Yeah,
No.
I think there are aesthetics that come from the lived experience of disability, but it's very, but they are myriad. I think there can be, but I don't think it would ever be one thing, or an easily quantifiable thing. But yeah, I guess I would say if you look at something like dance, then it's about a disability. If you qualify it, if you use a term like disability aesthetic, might be something that's questioning this idea of line that I mentioned before. This idea with dance and bodies that a conventional idea of line meaning straight lines, meaning straight limbs, quite often coming from these sorts of ballet, and verticality being, maybe disability aesthetics challenges those ideas of that being the beautiful aesthetic, or what's considered beautiful, that maybe that gets boring after a while, and that, and there's also that has been also dramatically questioned by lots of non-disabled choreographers as well, but I think then there's still within, retrospectively, still within, we realise, still quite a narrow boundary, or a narrow window of bodies, I guess, that you might have choreographers come along and not make things that only use straight legs and straight, but they're still using bodies that fall within a very specific narrow demographic, usually, that are super thin, super young, probably only 20-year-olds, often, historically, if we're talking contemporary dance, mostly white. All of those things, so it's still, there's lots of that gradually getting challenged,
I mean, as well as the aesthetics of access is a term that's often used, and I think that I think there is a difference between a disability aesthetic and aesthetics of access. But that's quite interesting. This idea of the creative output being influenced actually by making something accessible. Generally to disabled audiences. I suppose that difference is whether it's about audiences or whether it's about the artists. Although, of course, if you're talking about an aesthetics of access, it's kind of feeding into the creative process. But the end point, I guess, is you're thinking more about the audiences when it's an aesthetics of access.
I think so. Unless it's an access that's about how the performers themselves, something that is embedded because of the access needs of the performers themselves.
Is that something you've worked with previously, and work kind of integrating access elements as a way of influencing the work itself?
So far, it's probably from that side of it, in terms of, I think it mostly will manifest through aspects like time and energy and things like that, like the timing, or the commitment of energy within a piece might be affected by the access needs of myself or a performer, from that point of view, rather than as a performer who myself, I don't have access needs that require captioning or BSL, or I don't specifically need level access myself, but I would always I would now, for many years, always ensure that was essential in terms of the making of the work and access to the work. which leads lots of curators and programmers and things to presume that I need level access myself, and I tend not to argue with it because it's easier just to be like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Then you're more likely to make sure the audience has it. If you're worried about me having it, then we're not fun. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. You've worked quite a lot. You've worked loads internationally. I'm just wondering, do you get a sense when you do work internationally that sort of the approach to aesthetics generally is wildly different in different countries, but also a response to putting a disability aesthetic, say, on stage varies massively, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of places that they've never seen a disabled artist on stage, really, within certain institutions, for sure, or certain countries, I guess, where people are not really, may not even have experienced disabled people except in very, very cliched sort of environments, whether in a hospital or begging or, these sorts of things. So there's still places that I would perform that it's very much something that people have never encountered before. And then having to work out how to engage from that place and understand what the situation, as well you can when you're only maybe there for 3 or 4 days, like how to come into that and be as useful as you can, relatively speaking, and quite often having to, I think, understand that the best I can do is do the best thing that I can, which is do the show, perform the work, rather than suddenly think that I can go out and work out how to solve somewhere that being disabled is still completely and utterly, it's all very well for me to be like, disability is part of my identity, it's part of my culture, it's a positive experience, but that doesn't really mean shit if you go somewhere where actually being disabled is horrendously difficult and it's very hard to find a positive experience in it. So there's a whole sense of trying to also check all that privilege as much as you can when you go these places and go, okay, where can I be useful where they're at right now, and not suddenly be like, oh yeah, any disabled person you can find can just make work like this, that also kind of go, this isn't, it's not some sort of talent spot thing, but whether you can sometimes just be a catalyst to kind of shake people out of a very, very easy, lazy argument that they've made of like, disabled people would never be capable of making the kind of work that we put on our main stage. And it's like, actually, let's just, you might not like this piece, but you cannot dispute that it's a well executed and professionally crafted piece of work, whether you aesthetically like it or not, and sort of be hopefully part of clearing a bunch of that crap off the table for people, and to go, okay, this takes decades. You have to start now, and you have to start at grassroots, and you have to give people access to some arts activities as a start, might be one thing, or who are the people in the room that are interested? Who are the people that are interested in trying to do something here in this country or in this environment? And can you just make a space where they can come together 3 times a year? And is that a start?
And in every country, attitudes to disability are a bit different. And I think in France it's a bit different to the UK. But also bring it back to aesthetics a little bit, I think their approach to aesthetics is also different. And so I think there's a sense that I've heard, or a sort of anecdotal thing, I guess, that I've heard, that for some disabled artists who go to somewhere like France, where they're very interested in an aesthetic sensibility or something that's different aesthetically, then they kind of engage with it
Yeah.
on a different level, and the sort of French attitude seems to be, well, I don't care if it's disability-led art, I just care that it's art, and I care that there's this, it's something that's kind of pushing a boundary in some way.
Yeah. Again, this thing of like when I'm touring in different places, trying to just be aware of like what the context I'm going into is, and being like, in some places, like in certain places and in certain countries in Europe, yes, that sort of perspective of like the road in to the programmers, to the curators, to the people who are heads of the cultural funding, etc., is by talking about the art, is by saying, is this thing of pointing out something like, if you think you're cutting edge, if you think you're really a contemporary institution, then you should be challenging aesthetics. And actually, this is the new work that's challenging conventions of bodies and challenging conventions of capitalist relationships to how our bodies should function in the world, you know, and you can go in that way to them. Quite often, I think there's things of like, you get these interesting works in certain places coming out of some of those countries, some of those other countries in Europe, where they simply engage with disability from this offers something different. This is questioning aesthetics, but they don't often engage politically, which is really can be really difficult on from another level.
Absolutely.
Like, they don't take responsibility for learning the politics, or it's like, oh, we brought in this famous choreographer, they're going to make a piece with some disabled people, and they're really brilliant, you know, conceptual, and they make really brilliant conceptual work sometimes with disabled people, but what I sometimes find really problematic is there's no engagement with the politics of life for these people. Yeah. And I think sometimes maybe the problem is we are so much in the other direction in this country at times, that we've so engaged with the politics that maybe sometimes the art has not been pushed as far, or that I'm not sure there's always been as much ambition or pushing out, really, you know, to get away from, like, particularly if you look at dance, like getting away from the idea of the right to dance and the right to explore dance and the right to train, that it's also then perpetuating an aesthetic in dance that is completely and utterly informed from a non-disabled body. You know, all those training techniques, all your Cunningham technique, all your Limon, all Martha Graham, they have useful things to teach, but they're all coming from a non-disabled body and an aesthetic. And a lot of the contemporary dance aesthetic, much as it was kind of, you know, I'm not pretending to be very savvy about history of modern dance, but it was a rejection against the ballet aesthetics. But at the same time, it's kind of also then become the thing it was.
Yeah, it's stagnating.
It was pushing to question. It's become, you know, I jokingly always call it traditional contemporary dance, because it's become traditional to me. For me, it's traditional. Oh, you mean traditional contemporary dance? You know, that it's all pathways and, you know, ways of moving that are so informed by a non-disabled body, 2 legs, 2 arms, straight lines, very very conventional, if we're going to talk as well about values shaping aesthetics, very conventional notions of relationship to athleticism and fitness and what that looks like and what that is. You know, I mean, every dance poster being somebody jumping. You know, if it's not somebody getting their leg as high as they can go, it's somebody leaping and jumping. You know, and yeah, the artists that I'm more excited by are the ones that are challenging
those conventional aesthetics of what dance should be, the leaping and jumping, and what's fast and what's line. And
do you think we've got a long way to go in pushing that a different aesthetic? Do you think we're just starting?
I think in dance, I think there's more. I think it's getting better, but I think the more that independent artists can be supported, I think, to kind of keep pushing into that. I think then, I would like to see more people being supported to kind of push into that better.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's partly about also what you said earlier. It's like, as well, much as I love, I'm not going to complain about being commissioned and supported, but that it isn't just all funneled towards one or two people, that people then start to be like, they're doing it. It's like, actually, we need to be spreading that opportunity around a lot more.
I can sense, but do you feel a sort of weight of responsibility from the fact that you are often the name that's, you're one of the few people who would consider has an established career as a disabled artist in that scene, certainly as a solo artist.
Absolutely.
That must be quite difficult as well, though.
Yeah, I do feel a huge amount of responsibility, and I take the responsibility very seriously. That's also, I think, the thing that isn't always talked about, I think, beyond in sort of maybe disability community is that responsibility and the weight of that, and the work of that responsibility that, to different degrees, many of us are experiencing, of that it's my job to make my work, it's my job to make it the best I can so that it doesn't reflect badly on others, on other disabled makers, or that but also that if I go places, then I'm expected to speak from that perspective, particularly if I go places where the opportunities for disabled artists are still developing, that I'm expected to teach and teach workshops if I go. And I'm not complaining about it. I take that responsibility, and I think I choose also to choose to take it as well, but I think there's something maybe unacknowledged in the wider arts community about how much extra work that is for people. Like, I don't. And the responsibility of like, I do. I think everything that I put on a stage, or every word that I say about, like, I'm trying to make sure that I don't do anything that perpetuates the stereotypes and all the stuff that we've been trying to undo and unpick. Everything that every moment on a stage, I'm trying to work out, is there any way that is there any way this could be misread? And I'm constantly having to, I take it really seriously, and you can't always get it right, but I think, there was a really simple moment. An example, I remember when Jess and I made the duet, which was about 3 years ago, Jess Curtis and I, and we were looking at the photos. We'd had publicity photos done. And there were some where I was jumping, because it was one of the moves that it is part of my vocabulary in the crutches, are these sorts of suspension leaps that I do with the crutches. And there was a few photos where I'm doing that, and then some where I'm just sitting on Jess's shoulder at one point, we're just sitting down on the ground. We ended up choosing different images for different countries, based on where the debate, or where it felt that the progress was at the time. So when we were premiering in the UK, and I remember getting really stressed and really upset, because actually I get very serious about anything that goes out publicly. I get really quite anal about. I'm a bit of a control freak that way. And I remember Jess was just like, these are all great images. I would have any of these are great, you know. And I was really stressed and I actually started crying because I got very upset looking at them going, I don't want these bloody leaping photos again. I don't want to, because we were coming to Unlimited. Actually, we were premiering at Unlimited. And I felt the responsibility of not putting out the super crip image, of not the jump it. Even though I had been the super crip image of Unlimited 2 years before, it was me jumping on a super crip. But just also that things change and I keep changing and I keep going, I wouldn't say that now, or I wouldn't do that now, you know. And I was then in a place where I was like, but also I was looking at the images, every image I had to look at, I was like, what does this say about a disabled person? What does this say about a woman? I had to look at every image and think about it from that perspective of like, okay, does Jess look more dominant than me in that image? Or am I more dominant? And how does that read? And I remember, like, Jess came back to me the next day and he was like, it really never struck me, like, the amount that you're having, like, because he couldn't understand at the time quite why I was so upset by it and so stressed at that. But afterwards, that's what I love working with Jess. Like, he thinks of it, he takes it in and he processes it and he tries to understand what's going on and to support it. But really he was like, wow, yeah, I never realised that you're having to really do all that work. Like, that even just when a photograph goes out or a Twitter feed goes out or an Instagram goes out, like, it's not flippant to me. Like, I worry about those things, and partly I worry myself into then not doing it. But just that, I remember, it stayed in my head as quite a vivid example of like.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's not that much of that jumping movement in that show either, really.
No, there's
it's
like
not
one
a huge
scene.
part of it, really, is it, in that show?
Scene.
But I can see why all the promoters would want that image.
It's a dance piece,
yeah.
You know, they want that, you know, and that's what they think dance is. It's jumping, it looks athletic, you know. And so, yeah, those things, like, how do you not perpetuate, you know? And then when we that image, the jumping, we used that image in Germany because it felt like, again, like where things were at, that was an image that would get more people in. It would encourage more people to come.
Yeah.
And where they were at in the debate, they still needed that as their image to kind of just provoke a little bit more. Even though, you know, Berlin, you know, actually Berlin quite likes it's very sort of, maybe we didn't use it. No, we used that. Sorry, that's not true. We used the simple just sitting there photos for Berlin because they like that.
Yeah.
It was for America. So we also had it in America because Jeff's American and he had funding from there. The jumping image was for America.
Right, okay, that's really interesting.
So, yeah.
It's the spectacle.
Yeah.
If there ever was one.
Yeah, well, yeah, the modern dance aesthetic.
It's a bit of a double whammy for someone like you because you've got you've got this responsibility, in inverted commas, to kind of be political as a disabled artist because it's like that's the expectation, and then there's also the responsibility of you being an established disabled artist. And it's like, okay, I've got to push the ladder down or whatever as well. So it's really difficult. You can't just be an artist.
I have nothing to complain about in the sense that, you know, I'm an artist that gets support to make. I get to, you know, I've been very fortunate to be able to pretty much always make what I wanted to make, you know, and that's sadly a very privileged situation. Not you know, very few of the, pretty much all the artists I know, very few of them ever are in that position. I don't, you know, I don't entirely know what it is that makes people keep taking a risk on me, but yeah, but then that comes with, you know, people literally put money in the pot, then that becomes, you know, for me, that when it's public money as well, that's a huge responsibility, I think, and I don't take it lightly. Yeah. But I also am not going to sit here and complain about it because I know that I'm in an incredibly fortunate position where I have, you know, I have a producer, you know, and that's also a sort of self-perpetuating situation in that I
I have a producer, and I have a brilliant producer in Nadia Diaz, and that because I'm fortunate to have her, she generates support for me. She cultivates, like, actually, I want this person to know about your work. I think they are, and so not only do I have Luke being able to have these sorts of dramaturgical sort of long-term, but I have Nadia that works from that perspective in terms of going, actually, I think you should have some sort of residency thing here, and I'm going to make sure that these people become aware of you, and I'm not having to do it all myself, which most of my colleagues I'm very aware are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's also that her savvy and her support and her care of the work that I make also makes it possible to keep making work.
Do you think people have a sense of, is there something, not quintessential, but is there something that you could say is always there in a Claire Cunningham show that kind of runs through?
I'd like to think that I try to bring quite a level of honesty into a room. And I think, quite often, with the exception of Give Me a Reason to Live, all the work I make usually has a thread of humour running through it. There's always usually some sort of humour in it, and quite dark humour.
Yeah.
I think quite often it's often a bit about sort of puncturing moments and sort of being willing to sort of acknowledge the emotion or the sentiment and puncture it, but not destroy it, I think is something that I try to do. Yeah. And so I think hopefully those things are quite often things that cross.
In my opinion, you work across art forms for a dance artist in a way that a lot of people in contemporary dance don't.
Mm.
So there's usually quite a strong narrative in your work, where there often isn't in a lot of contemporary dance work. You seem to work with the music. You work often with a composer rather than to existing music, for example. There's often, I would almost say, some relationship to kind of live art in an element to some of your performances. That's just from an outside perspective.
Yeah, I think certainly my relationship with time, I think, is somewhere in which maybe that relationship with live art cultivated. Of like when I began to go and watch work that kind of falls under live art. Beginning to really appreciate that challenging of conventional ways of working in time as well, and then beginning to understand, also meeting Carrie Sandel and being introduced to the concept of crip time and really embracing that, and I'm going, this lived experience of disability changes our relationship to time. And again, how that comes back to values, like how do you bring, like, I'm interested in how you bring that into a room. And I think that's something I'm interested in, particularly in disabled artists, how we bring our worlds on stage. That it's this thing of like, we bring our relationship to time, to space, and to other people and objects. That's what we bring on stage. It doesn't stop at the wings. Like, we don't get to the wings and then suddenly, we can, we don't look where we're going, or we can see where we didn't see before. It's like, that's the thing that's what I think is really interesting to embrace in the work. And that's why I'm interested in working with disabled artists, is like, how does those lived experiences of relationship to energy, and that we're not going to make something that's like super fast and pumping for like 50 minutes. It's like, I'm lucky if I can go for 2.5 minutes at anything remotely high speed. I don't have stamina like that. So I'm not going to make a work like that, but how do I bring an audience in to something that might not move quickly, but can still hold
people. And how, those things, I think, that's where I get interested in how the lived experience of disability comes on stage, of bringing people who are maybe normative bodied people used to working in or seeing or processing the world at particular speeds, how those things changed, or how the layout of a space might be different because of access. Or, like that I would create spaces where I navigate things on the ground, because that's something that's very specific to my physicality and the way that I look at the world. So I shape the room because of that,
Yeah.
And how that's what I'm that's what excites me about disabled artists, like, and particularly, coming into something like dance, like how that gets shaken up more. That it's not simply about how the body moves, it's about the time and the space around that body and how it engages with other bodies. That's where the choreography for me is, and the aesthetics that come from those lived experiences.
Visit greyeye.org and disabilityarts.online for further details on productions, events, interviews, opinions, reviews and learning opportunities.